ASEAN Breakfast Call Dialogue, widening your horizons.
Hi, this is Arlene and you're listening to Durian ASEAN, the voice of discovery and sharing. In our third segment of our ASEAN Breakfast Call Dialogue, we have a guest. She is all the way from UNDP, and she's going to share with us on the recent launch of the Global Human Development Report with a focus on Malaysia, Brunei, and Singapore. You know why? Because she is actually a UNDP resident representative from Malaysia, Singapore, and Brunei, and she is Michelle Gyles-McDonnough.
Thank you very much, Arlene. Good to be able to join you.
Yeah, it is great to finally have you to the studio to talk about the report itself. But before we go further on the report, perhaps a bit of introduction about UNDP and yourself.
Okay. Well, UNDP, as you know, is a development organization of the United Nations, and our focus is on empowering lives and building resilient nations. And so we work with governments, with civil society, with private sector, basically with all stakeholders in the development process, around the world to see how we can advance human development and enlarge the choices for people. Mm-hmm. We are present on the ground in more than 170 countries. And so with that, we have quite an extensive global knowledge network, deep expertise, and very global experience from working intimately with national stakeholders on the ground in countries that can help us to facilitate not only the sharing of experiences from country to country, but also to address the specifics in various country contexts.
And you are representing Malaysia, Singapore, and Brunei. That must be a whole load of burden.
Yes, it's quite a privilege, but it's also a very heavy responsibility. I'm based here in Kuala Lumpur, but from the base here, working also with the government of Singapore and also with Brunei Darussalam.
UNDP office in Malaysia, Singapore, and Brunei. What is the focus? Is there any particular objective that it wants to achieve?
Yes, well, based in support of the government of Malaysia, we're here to support the national ambitions to reach developed status by 2020 and all the aspects of that national vision. Our work here has been focused on promoting inclusive growth that is inclusive and sustainable, and also looking at the strengthening of institutions and making institutions more effective. We also have quite a substantial engagement with government and other counterparts in the area of the environment, looking at biodiversity policies, support for interventions to address climate change, and also looking at more sustainable energy options, yes.
Mm-hmm. And recently, the UNDP also released the Global Human Development Report. But why you want to focus on releasing such report in the first place?
Well, we actually released both the Global Human Development Report and the National Human Development Report for Malaysia at the same time. Why do we do global reports? The Human Development Report is actually a flagship product of UNDP, and we have been producing this report for quite some time now, since 1990. And the idea of the report was to broaden our concept of development beyond just economic and income indicators, and to look at, promote human development as an approach that advances the richness of human life, rather than the richness of the economy in which, people live, which is only part of the challenge that we have. And so the human development approach is based on the concept that the basic purpose of development is really to enlarge people's choices and to create an enabling environment for people to be able to enjoy long, healthy, and creative lives, and in so doing contribute to society and their economy.
Mm-hmm. So what are the criteria that you measure human development? Because you said you make a distinction that is beyond just about economy and politics and all that.
Well, the human development index, it emphasizes people's capabilities. It's an indicator that looks at 3 dimensions. It's a summary measure of average achievement in key dimensions in dimensions of human development. So we look at a long and healthy life, being knowledgeable, and having a decent standard of living. And, whether these 3 dimensions, the extent to which they're available in the countries around the world. So in the health dimension, we assess that by using life expectancy at birth. To address the knowledge dimension, we look at education, the mean years of schooling for adults that are aged 25 years, and we also look at expected years of schooling for children of school entering age. And then the third component we use income also as an indicator of standard of living and to measure standard of living. Mm-hmm. And so the HDI is a composite of these 3 indicators.
Such a wide range of criteria to sort of measure all this human development in terms of progress. But if you compare in general, like between different countries, developed countries, developing countries, and also countries that are still not there yet when it comes to economic development, is there a huge divide in terms of human development progress?
Well, certainly what we are seeing around the world is a rise in inequality. We're seeing the inequality between nations just as much as we're seeing rising inequality within nations. And so, in fact, this is one of our major challenges as we look forward to the development agenda for the next 15 years as we come to the end of the MDG term in 2015. Also recognizing the growing inequality and also that the price of inequality for countries is quite high. We've also adjusted our human development indicators, and in 2010 we also started using an inequality-adjusted human development index. We felt that it was important because it was we need not only to look at the average achievements of a country on health and education and income, but we also need to see how those achievements are distributed among the population, and to really discount each dimension according to the level of inequality. And so basically what we're trying to measure is the cost to progress in human development of inequality. Mm-hmm. The ideal situation, of course, would be that if you looked at a country's human development index and its index adjusted for inequality, that those 2 levels are the same. But often what you will find is a gap between the 2, measuring that cost to human development of inequality.
Mm-hmm. When it comes to inequality, definitely it has been such a popular word that globally has been used in political rallies and also among society and civil society especially. But when you talk about inequality, I'm sure it's beyond just economic inequality, but in terms of inequality of access and all that. But if you can just explain to us when it comes to the Global Human Development Report that you compile, how do you really measure inequality in a sense that it encompasses beyond just economic inequality?
Yes. Well, one way, as we said, is to look at income, but we don't think that provides sufficient nuancing and addresses issues of relative poverty. So we also look at poverty in overlapping deprivations in order to complement the monetary measures of poverty. For example, people's lives, you experience your lives in many different ways. And so in order to really assess well-being and poverty, you need to look at deprivations along multiple dimensions, whether that's deprivations in health, related to education, related to the environment, related to, a number of issues. And so particularly as countries move up the development ladder, but in all countries, it's a way to enable us to deconstruct the aggregate and to be able to look at deprivations within countries and across countries where you can, address it by region, by ethnicity, and, break it down along different groupings and lines, which would then make it more useful for policymakers in terms of targeting and the effective allocation of resources to address specific problems.
Mm-hmm. When it comes to other areas that you focus on human development, what are the other key significant areas that you think countries should pay attention more?
Well, certainly. I mean, I think those key areas that, form the building blocks of the Human Development Index are really amongst, critical basic areas. We need to ensure that everyone has equitable access to educational opportunities and also the quality of education that they're able to have. We need to know that people are able to live long and healthy lives, and so access to health care and these basic social services are important. And also that there's social protection in place to address, the vulnerabilities that people may face. Because even, as people improve their conditions of life, just as in countries, you experience shocks from time to time, and you need to make sure that there's resilience at the level of individuals and households to be able to withstand shocks so that the country can continue to advance.
Mm-hmm. When it comes to access to all these different areas that you mentioned in terms of health, education, and also in terms of job opportunities or employment, has the gap between those that are able to access easily and those that have difficulties to access, maybe due to their socioeconomic conditions, or maybe it's due to their environment, has it been reduced throughout the years?
Well, I think certainly we're coming off of now next year will be the deadline for the Millennium Development Goals. That would be a framework over the last 15 years where we have set very clear targets and indicators to measure progress of the 8 Millennium Development Goals. And the MDGs really have been an unprecedented push against poverty around the world. And we have seen significant successes. We have reduced dramatically the number of people living on less than $1.25 a day. But, development is not an end game. It is not really a culmination. It is a journey. And it is a process. And I think where we're focused is on the continual improvement in people's lives. There's still also billions of people around the world living below the poverty line or in vulnerable situations. And so the work needs to continue, which is why we are now, we've engaged in this global conversation with citizens around the world to better understand their needs as well and to integrate for the first time, civil society voices and people's voices into the design of the framework and to set new targets for ourselves as to how to continue to improve those conditions. So yes, we have reduced poverty, we have reduced maternal mortality, we've made significant achievements under the Millennium Development Goals, but we still have a long way to go.
We still have a long way to go, but when it comes to efforts to reduce all these different gaps, what are the success stories? Maybe you can mention a few countries or a few of the findings based on the report itself. For example, high illiteracy to almost probably 90% of the population are literate.
Well, maybe this is a good time to switch from a more global level conversation and to look at maybe the Malaysia Human Development Report and the analysis we did of how to spur inclusive growth, and doing that through a human development lens. To address your question, if I use Malaysia as an example, Malaysia is a country that has made really dramatic and quite significant achievements since its independence until today. They have been able to reduce poverty levels from near 50% to now under 1.7%, looking at 2014 data at an aggregate level. This is really quite a stellar achievement. However, as I said, Malaysia is at a place where it is important now to really address the lags, those that may be left behind. And to do that, you need to use more relative measures of poverty and to really be able to find a measure that allows you to look beneath the aggregate into specific communities, into specific regions, rural versus urban. And so we've been working with Malaysia, for example, to design a multidimensional poverty index to complement its current poverty line income, and to basically take this approach of deprivations to look at the remaining challenges in the country.
Are the rural and urban divide is still very wide in Malaysia?
Well, what we find is that while overall it's been reduced, we have pockets. For example, the indigenous communities where the human development indicators are not at the same level of the national indicators. We do have issues in urban poor populations as well as in rural areas, and we do also have regional disparities between, say, Peninsular Malaysia and East Malaysia. And so the report is really an effort to do a detailed and very thorough analysis to provide the evidence to support government's responses and interventions as it tries to reach into those last mile areas as the country looks towards its aspirations for 2020.
What about in terms of gender? I guess beyond just Malaysia Human Development Report, but in terms of globally, has the gender inequality, either in terms of pay, in terms of access and all that, has it been reduced?
Gender inequality, we have made some progress, but not as dramatic progress as we would like to see. So we still have quite a journey to take on gender. And certainly as we look to the next set of development goals, it is already clear that gender equality really has to be at the heart of this next push for development progress.
The focus hasn't been that much, isn't it?
No, it has been a focus, but gender inequality still remains a major barrier to human development. Even though we have made these significant strides since 1990, we still haven't achieved gender equity, and there's still many disadvantages that face women and girls.
But has it been because of culture, or is it because of the failure of government policy?
Well, we have issues in terms of just, societal norms, culture, the structure of the economy, etc. And so we do need to ensure that we remove, structural inhibitors. We remove discrimination in both access and in quality. That we do also remove discrimination in political representation, in the economy, in the labor market, etc. to be able to give women the opportunity. To reach their full potential as well.
Yeah. So from gender, I want to focus on employment, because globally you mentioned that inequality is one of the key issue that it seems like has been stamping down the human development progress. When it comes to employment, has the issue of wage, issue of fair share of distribution of wealth been something of a concern?
Yes, I think around the world it remains a concern. But if I can use the context of Malaysia to elaborate. For example, Malaysia has a labor force participation rate of women of roughly around 48-49%. And the government, recognizing the importance of increasing women's participation in the workforce, has set a target for itself of 55%. But what we're finding is that even where women are in the labor force, we're finding occupational segregation, and we're also finding significant disparities in wages for the same work. So, and you find the highest disparities at the most senior levels. And so these are issues that we have to address. It's also interesting that even where you have occupational areas where women dominate, even in those areas, you're finding significant wage gap where men are actually earning higher wages for doing similar work. So it does say that we've got quite a journey left to travel.
It's actually very revealing for the Malaysian Human Development Report to highlight this particular area of gender wage gap, because when we talk about wage gap, we will always think about the issue being highlighted in Western countries, but never before in Malaysia to address this kind of similar problem.
Well, I think we've been focusing certainly in UNDP's work around the world on all issues of gender equality across all countries, because frankly, no country really has achieved gender equality. We do have countries with much better records than others, but it is still unfinished business, for many, many countries around the world.
In terms of human development progress, what are other areas when it comes to female, either in terms of health, education, employment, that maybe is worth to highlight in this interview?
Well, I think basically what we're aiming for is, gender equity, where women and men, boys and girls, are able to have the same access to opportunity, the same possibilities of enlarging their own life choices. And we're very far away from that. I was in a discussion this morning where we were launching the State of the World Population Report for UNFPA and looking at young people. Women and girls and adolescents also need to be able to have to realize their sexual and reproductive health rights. Now, it tends to be looked at in cultural context, etc. But if girls and women aren't able to make important life choices based, we hope, on equitable investment in education, health, all the things that are important to put a young person on the right path, they also need self-agency. They also need to be able to have access to information and services to make the right decisions in their lives. So we need also to address issues of, for example, early marriage.
Especially in Malaysia, it has been quite a buzz among Malaysian society when there were cases of young girls being married off to older men, and it's acceptable.
Well, it's interesting because I don't think we also can assume, and this is why evidence is important, and taking decisions and making policy based on evidence is important. Because the interesting thing is we assume that it's also young girls being married off to older men, but it's also young girls being married to young boys. And so really what we need to look at is what are those determinants that are driving the
motivation of...
what is the motivation for marrying off a young person, girl or boy, somewhere between, before they even reach adolescence or in adolescence. Because what this means is then you have children becoming children. It means it delays or it completely derails maybe university education, which means then it limits options for, decent jobs. It leads to underemployment in the wider economy. It leads to the not full maximization of the potential of young people. And young people, we know, there are 1.8 billion young people in this world. And we have to find a way to make it possible for them to have decent jobs, live long, healthy lives, and thereafter to take stewardship of a future.
Yeah, definitely. But is it solely the responsibility of the government to ensure that young people are protected in terms of being able to make choices for themselves? Because at the same time, different countries have different approach culturally in terms of how a family institution is supposed to be. To certain culture, maybe having young people going through only like probably a few years of education would be enough for them to have a family and then carry on the cycle of their own tradition or traditional way of living.
It's certainly not the sole responsibility of government, and many things in development is not the sole responsibility of government. It's all institutions in society and all stakeholders in the progress of a nation that need to come together to make sure that we're able to move things forward. But it is, in this case, government's responsibility to ensure that there is access to information and services regarding sexual and reproductive health rights, so that young people are then informed and able to make responsible life choices as well. These issues translate into wider economic and societal issues. If we look, let's say, for example, in Malaysia, if we have 2 persons contracting HIV/AIDS every day, and 18% of those are young people, is it not important that young people then have the information at their fingertips to know both how to make choices that hopefully may prevent contraction of this disease, and then once, if they unfortunately end up in this situation, to be able to live, a long life and live responsibly with the disease. And so really, access to information is quite important.
Mm-hmm. We will take a short break. When we return, we will discuss more about the Malaysia Human Development Report.
ASEAN Breakfast Call Dialogue, widening your horizons.
Hey, this is Arlene. We are returning back to our discussion today on the Global Human Development Report as well as the Malaysia Human Development Report that were launched recently, with a focus on human development with Michelle Gyles-McDonnough. She's the United Nations Development Programme resident representative from Malaysia, Singapore and Brunei. So early on we discussed a lot about human development, but talking about countries, we mentioned a bit about the Malaysian Human Development Report, but just to put a more specific lens on the Malaysia Human Development Report, I think inequality is definitely one of the key outcome out of that report.
The first thing I need to clarify is that when we do a human development report for a country, it doesn't look at everything just generically. The idea is to focus that report on a vexing problem that a country faces. In this case, Malaysia wanted to focus on the issue of inclusive growth as a driver for progress and to take them towards their vision of developed country status. Now, as we look at inclusive growth, then it did highlight, that we still have quite a bit of unfinished business in terms of reducing inequality and poverty, particularly amongst specific groups and vulnerable groups. It was an opportunity to use this more multidimensional measure of poverty and to look at multiple deprivations to provide government with an in-depth analysis of where their remaining challenges are, what are the pockets and the groups of people and communities that they need to focus on, and also to take a regional and spatial look at the development achievements as a way of focusing on their remaining gaps in order to move forward. The new economic model and the NEP, the new economic policy, certainly made a huge dent in reducing poverty, and we've seen the benefits of that as we started this conversation in reducing poverty from almost 50% to less than 1.7%. Malaysia is now interested in, we've done that, but clearly as you look around, you can see the progress, but we see that not everyone is sharing in that progress. So it's now taking a look at what remains to be done, and this report helps them in that direction.
So what remains to be done, and do we still need affirmative action?
Well, I think, affirmative policies, to enable improved access to education and jobs have helped various groups, not just in Malaysia but in other places, to more fully realize their economic potential. And it can improve, and it has improved in the case of Malaysia, the conditions for vulnerable groups in particular contexts. Now, the key, though, to such measures is that they're not standalone interventions, and that these measures they're an intrinsic part of a broader commitment to improve the conditions of the disadvantaged and remedy the peculiarities of these specific and excluded groups. So success I think, is most common, where you find mutual reinforcement in the context between the policy, where the policy interventions are embedded in larger efforts to reduce inequalities and wealth and capabilities. So what we've seen is that while the inter-ethnic gap has been significantly reduced, we're still seeing the gaps, the wealth gaps and the gaps in assets and opportunities within the ethnic group.
So intra-ethnic is still prevailing.
Intra-ethnic is still a challenge. And so it means that we're, in this next 6-year period, as Malaysia thinks about it, we're going to have to find ways to continue to address the inter-ethnic gap, which is largest amongst the Malays, but also the significant gap amongst the Chinese and Indian population. And so I think the approach the government is taking towards looking at a bottom 40% approach, looking at the disadvantage just across the bottom, and, as I said, embedding the affirmative policies.
But that would be more of a needs-based policy.
It is needs-based. And this is why the kind of measurement that allows us to sort of drill down into ethnic group to get beyond the aggregate figure of 1.7%, which then may lull you into thinking there's not much left to be done in Malaysia, but to take that multidimensional measure and dig down into the specific conditions in Sabah and Sarawak versus Peninsular Malaysia, amongst Bumiputra and other Bumiputra minorities, amongst urban poor versus rural communities, Chinese versus Indian. So it allows you to try and zone in on where your issues are and target your resources based on evidence. That's where we hope to see the next steps go.
So it seems like it's a huge task ahead for Malaysia to address it. And one of the key areas besides intra-ethnic inequality, another area that I think very few people actually highlighted it, but it was highlighted during the launch of the Human Development Report, is relative poverty between different states in Malaysia. Why different states have higher poverty compared to other states?
In terms of why, I can't go that far back, but I think certainly what it does suggest is that there are different investments that need to be made. I think Malaysia, with this report, now has the evidence and the analysis and the understanding of where investment needs to be targeted, and to ensure that we address the situation in terms of vulnerable groups in Sabah and Sarawak, as well as vulnerable groups such as the Orang Asli in Peninsular Malaysia and urban pockets, and provide the services and opportunities that are necessary for these communities to move along. It is challenging. You do have to tackle also issues of remoteness and small populations and how to efficiently and effectively provide services. But there are ways of doing it. There are examples, in other parts of the world that maybe we also could learn from, just as other countries learn from Malaysia on other issues, and target the investments going forward at lifting this bottom 40%.
On one hand, you have the government's responsibility to address the issue of inequality through policy. But on another hand, another of the key findings that I personally found it to be very interesting, and I think it was such a hype in Malaysia at one point, a couple of weeks ago, was the issue of savings. Seems like 90% of Malaysians do not have savings. This is a huge deal, right? When it comes to progressing in human development, having lack of saving is not really good for a nation.
Yeah. Well, the first thing is as we read these reports, it's very important that we also read the definitions and the analysis. Now, this is a report on inclusive growth. And so the focus of the analysis was on precautionary savings. We're interested in the situation of the bottom 40%, what places them in the bottom 40%, how they can move out of the bottom 40%, and when they move, that the new place they find, the new positioning they find in life and in the economy is sufficiently secure that, from a small shock, they don't fall back into poverty. Now, savings becomes important in this equation, and precautionary savings. So the savings calculation does not include financial investments, and it does not include savings that are either forced savings or savings that you don't have access to immediately, such as retirement savings. Because if you're in the situation of a shock in a household or in a family, you can't tap into those resources.
So when you say precautionary
when
saving,
we say money in a bank account that you can access readily to address your needs.
That is precautionary saving.
That is precautionary savings. And so what you find is that even while there is a large percentage of the population, and over almost 90% of the population have bank accounts, the question is the savings in these accounts that they have access to is quite low. And so this is something that needs to be addressed, particularly when you look at the data on household debt, where household debt levels are quite high, standing at around 86%.
So is the household debt the main culprit of why Malaysians are unable to save enough for rainy days?
It won't be any one issue or one bullet. You do have high household debt, and there are many determinants of household debt and motivations for why you have household debt, right? Some of those are things that government can't control. Individuals need to control. But at the same time, it is an economy where wages are also
it's stagnant, right?
A small share of national income. So there is, the gap in wages is and the level of wages is also an issue.
So wages and productivity hasn't really go hand in hand together in terms of progress.
Right. Well, right. Productivity has gone much faster than wages, and so that is something, the wage share to national income is something the government will need to pay attention to going forward. The introduction of minimum wages recently in the country was an important step, and if you look at various modeling that has been done, has the potential to make an important dent in terms of inequality.
Wow, so a long way to go when it comes to addressing inequality with all the different gaps that is in Malaysia in particular. So what are the challenges that Malaysian government can do to face and hopefully eventually prevent this gap from widening? Probably in the next 5 years, if it's possible for the government to address this?
Well, I think the first and foremost is to, make their policies going forward on evidence, and this is why they have undertaken a report like this. Some may have looked at it to say it's critical, but that's not the point of the report. The report is to do an analysis of the situation as it exists, and from a real picture, take the decisions going forward. And so it's really quite a responsible act of government to take on a report like that. That's the first and important step. I think the next step is as the country designs its 11th development plan, to see how it both prioritizes the actions that it needs to take to address these and other issues that the country is facing as they try to make this leap towards 2020, and that the budgetary allocations to be able to make these transitions that they're in place. And I think the country is now in the process of designing its next plan with a view of announcing that plan by mid next year. And so the question will be how much uptake of these issues there are, as well as other issues that need to be addressed, and how they will be taken forward through the National Development Plan.
You are also in charge with being a representative for Singapore and Brunei, besides being for Malaysia.
Yes.
Perhaps a bit of an overview on the country human development report for Singapore and Brunei.
Well, as you know, Singapore is included amongst the high human development countries. And also, this is a grouping of three quite different countries. with different needs. Our work in Singapore is really largely focused around trying to learn from Singapore's experience in terms of its public service excellence and its public administration, which we see as a core ingredient for many countries around the world as they look to the next phase development agenda. Because it's not, while you need to allocate resources and make the investments, they also need to be managed, and there needs to be stewardship and effective stewardship at both the political and administrative levels to do this. So we have established a new global center for public service excellence in Singapore that is trying to share global experiences, do analysis on new and emerging spaces as a way to help countries, not just Singapore, Malaysia, and everybody else, but countries around the world, because it's a global center, to tackle this particular challenge of effective institutions, public service excellence, and public administration, and how that interfaces with the political leadership for stewardship of a country for development progress, for human development progress. So as far as Singapore is concerned, that's the heart of the focus of our work there.
Mm-hmm.
With Brunei, our involvement and engagement has largely been around stewardship of their natural resources and management of their natural capital.
Mm-hmm.
We hope to be able to broaden that engagement beyond the focus on sustainability, but that is a matter for discussion.
Okay, so there's a long way to go, but glad that UNDP take the efforts to somehow address or at least somehow highlight issues or areas within countries all over the world in terms of addressing the progress of human development. So all the best, and thank you very much, Michelle.
Well, thank you, and thanks very much for that. I think our primary focus is to support the advancement of countries, which is the ambition of all leaders and all governments, and to be able to work on the areas where we can squeeze out maximum impact to make a difference in people's lives. So thank you so very much for taking the time to have this conversation with me.